Lois Wilson is a religious leader ordained by the United Church of Canada in 1965. She has served pastorate with her clergy husband for 15 years, and then she moved to other aspects of ministry, becoming president of the Canadian Council of Churches, the first female moderator for the United Church of Canada, and president of the World Council of Churches. Lois was appointed as an independent senator by former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. She has 4 children, 12 grandchildren, 5 great-grandchildren. That's information that perhaps you already know about Lois, but a couple of other things that you may not know. She is an author. She is a well-traveled speaker. She is a feisty advocate for human rights issues. And so today we are very, very pleased to welcome Lois as our theological reflector.
Good morning. I'm very happy to be with you to share my faith perspective and my theological convictions with you about the guaranteed livable income. I'm going to tell you a story from my faith community because my experience with interfaith groups is that it becomes richer when people share their own faith traditions with others. And I'm sure that there are stories like this from other faith traditions, but I happen to be from the Christian community, so I want to share this one from the New Testament. Interruptions are very interesting. I don't know how many of you watched the vice president debate between Pence and Kamala Harris, but he was constantly interrupting her until finally she said, "Stop, I'm speaking. Pardon me, I'm speaking." And that shut him up, and he became a little more pliable, and they began a very good conversation. My point being that interruptions allow for new possibilities. Now, we're experiencing COVID, which is the largest interruption any of us have ever had in our lives. But to me, that holds out the possibility of new possibilities and new relationships. So here goes. The story I'm about to tell is really 2 stories because it's one story inside another. Story number 1 is the story of Jairus, who was a Jew, a big man in the synagogue, and he sought Jesus out at the seashore. Jesus was busy with the street people milling around on the seashore, and Jairus, this very important man, went down to ask him if he would come to heal his daughter. He asked Jesus to lay his hands on her. So it was the laying on of hands, the ritual of healing that he asked for. And Jesus listened to him and then started off to go to Jairus' house. Suddenly, Mark interrupts this story with a second story, because it is a story. This is not biography. This is not history. This is a story. This is reflections on the meaning of Jesus by his early followers. So story number 1 is interrupted by story number 2. And it is the story of a woman who has been menstruating for 12 years. And as a result has been isolated from her community totally. And we know in this COVID time what isolation does for people and for the deterioration of mental health. She's isolated, she's poor, she has nowhere to turn, and she has no community supports. She's barren, she's never born children, which is a no-no in a community that really valued producing children. So she's an old maid in that sense. And she's desperate. She'd heard that if she can get in touch with Jesus, if she can reach out and touch his talent, that is his prayer shawl, which is the symbol of liberation for the Jewish community since they were led out of slavery by Moses. If she can only touch his talent, that will put her in touch with the whole liberating tradition of the Jewish community. So she inches up behind him very carefully and slowly and reaches out and touches his talent. And immediately, the scripture says, she knew that she was freed of her trouble. What was her trouble? Was it her physical disease? Was it her isolation? What was it? Perhaps all. As soon as she touched him, Jesus knew that some energy had gone from him, and he turned around and he said, "Who touched me?" And There was silence for a while, and then the woman confessed everything and told him who she was and why she had touched him. Then Jesus turns to her and says, and this is a very critical verse in the whole story, "Your faith has made you whole. Go in peace. You are healed from your trouble." Now, there's various translations of it, but it starts out with, "Your faith has made you free, has cured you from your disease." What is faith? Well, a lot of people confuse it with belief. I once asked Ted Scott, the primate of the Anglican Church in Canada, what his understanding of faith was. And he said, well, I'll illustrate it for you. Suppose you go to Niagara Falls with some man who has a guy wire across the halls, and he says, I can walk across that falls on the guy wire and I won't fall in. Do you believe that I can do that? You say, yes, I believe that. That's belief. But if he turns to you and says, get on my shoulders and I'll take you across, that's risk. That's faith. So Jesus says to the woman, your faith, your ability to risk, your ability to come out and touch my talent, that has set you free. Well, then the second part of the translation is interesting. Set free from what? Was it her menstruation for 12 years? Or was it her poverty? Was it her isolation? We don't know. And various translations of the Bible have different ways of saying this. But in any case, she was set free from isolation to be freed to participate in the full life of the community as a full member. Whether she ever ceased the flow of blood, we'll not know, but it no longer isolated her from the community and from social supports. Then he says, go in peace. Now, I used to live in Hamilton. I worked with the Jewish Community Center down the street, and I used to phone them and say, hello, and they'd say, shalom. And I felt like a barbarian because they were saying, go in wholeness, go in peace, go in wholeness with full relationships established between us. Shalom, a beautiful word. So this was the message. The Gospel of Mark joins the two stories because the girl is 12 years old. Jairus' daughter is 12 years old, and the woman has the flow of blood for 12 years. So 12 is the magic number that's used here. 12 being a symbol in Jewish history of wholeness, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 gates to Jerusalem, and so on. So it means totality and wholeness. The two stories are linked. But right after this, story number 1 comes back again, and Jesus is still at the lakeshore. There's a message comes that Jairus' daughter is near death, or one of the Gospels has her dead already, but she's near death, and could Jesus come and help her and heal her and make her whole again? And so he goes with a great crowd, apparently, and when he gets to Jairus' home, he sends them all away because he wants peace and quiet. And he goes in with 2 of his disciples, and he takes the little girl's hand, again, the laying on of hands. And he says, get up, little girl. And she gets up. And then instead of saying, get down on your knees and thank me, he says, give her something to eat. She's hungry. And so she is restored to life again as well. Story of 2 women, Jairus' daughter and the woman with the flow of blood, who are rescued from being isolated, and they become full members of the community again through social supports and through their own risk-taking of reaching out. Well, why did Mark interrupt story number 1 with story number 2? I think the message is that those of us at the center cannot be made whole until those at the edge are made whole. There's a symbiotic relationship between us. And if that's so, what are the implications for COVID? I recently watched Steve Paikin on TVO's Agenda, And it was on COVID-19 and what was going to happen to people who had lost their livelihood because of it. And 2 or 3 of them kept repeating the phrase, well, there's not much we can do because the poor we have with us always. And they knew that was a quote from somewhere, but nobody could remember where it came from. Well, I was so mad that I sent Steve Paikin an email and I said, that is a misquote from the biblical book of Deuteronomy, which says, the poor you shall have with you always if you do not keep my commandments. And the commandment, of course, is to look after the poor and to look after that balance between the center and those at the edge. He wrote me back a very nice note saying he would never quote that again without quoting the whole thing. In any case, these stories are people at the center like Jared, like you and me, and people at the edge, students, the people who've lost their jobs through businesses, the indigenous people, the poor, who don't have a livelihood and cannot participate in the life of the community. They can't go to the art gallery. They can't go to restaurants because they don't have any money. They're poor and they're isolated. But the possibility of new relationships comes out of the COVID experience. And if we're able to shift priorities in Canada so that we can get the guaranteed livable income for those below 2,000 a year, 2,000 a month rather, then we'll have been part of a massive shift in social and economic relationships in Canada, as massive as Medicare was in the 1960s. The last push during the throne speech, the Senate people told me that they were cautiously optimistic about such a shift. I'm hoping and knowing that the faith communities will weigh in on this heavily now, and we'll keep at it. It's a marathon. It's not a short dash. So remember the story of Jairus and the woman with the flow of blood and the balancing act there, because Jairus was not free until the woman at the edge had been healed, had been included in full community. So interruptions are interesting because they pose the possibility of new relationships. We have that historic time in Canada now. And besides, it might be very good news for the poor. Thank you.